when I was in that physical space with the Dalai Lama, it was like as if time stood still.
You survived stage 4 cancer and a heart transplant, correct?
I had a near-death experience in 2016 with a flat line for 4 minutes.
Oh.
The hard thing with cancer is, the American Cancer Society, the estimates are that 40% of all cancers could be prevented.
Can we just, figure out like what metrics we should actually look at to know if our heart's healthy? Because it's getting confusing.
Quite frankly, I think it's confusing amongst the medical providers in and of themselves.
All right, Don Mussallem, how are we doing? We're coming from India. How cool is this to jump on the podcast 4 a.m. from India? Can you just talk about the experience of a lifetime you just had last night? And then we'll dive into just an incredible story that you have.
Oh gosh, it's great to be here, David. And I am just so thrilled to be able to share some of my experiences this past week here in Dharamsala, India. This was a very short notice trip that came about. I was invited to spend the week with like-minded individuals representing 18 countries. And we were able to spend our time with Jinpa and Bob Thurman, as well as the Dalai Lama, discussing love, compassion, and the divine feminine. So you can imagine, as a physician in this space, I'm actually medical director for employee well-being at Mayo Clinic, how powerful this experience is to be able to bring home these truly authentic messages to help to elevate the compassion and love for our healthcare providers, for the patients I serve, for their loved ones, and even in our own personal lives, right? I mean, oh my gosh, talk about the elevating, enriching experience this is, just to process all of those aspects of life within the world we see with the polarization. It gives me chills to talk about this. But it's just been truly a vibrant experience of our aliveness.
Yeah.
So,
So the Dalai Lama, you're talking love and the Dalai Lama, and you're with him personally. Give me one or two things that you're just like, okay, I'm gonna take that home from the Dalai Lama on love.
oh my gosh. When I was in that physical space with the Dalai Lama, it was like as if time stood still. His face is pure joy. And, you say when you see people that, oh my gosh, they illuminate light and energy. Yeah. It was as if his skin glowed. His skin color isn't the same skin color as yours and mine. And in that moment, he actually touched my face. And it was just like, in that moment, I heard no other sound around me. It was just time stood still. And I think my heart even stopped. You were just one with him. And this loving moment of just non-judgment. It was so amazing. And, it's just really appreciating that experience of happiness for others and wishing for others to just be free of suffering. And I can't think of any better message nowadays than what he represents. So it was beautiful.
Yeah. That's really cool. That is, love and joy illuminated right there. Hey, all right. So you've got a crazy story. So I'm just going to hit the audience in the face with this right now. You survived stage 4 cancer and a heart transplant, correct?
Yes. I described.
Those were double thumbs up with a big smile and laugh. Look at that joy. All right. You got to tell the audience about this. What? Give us a story here.
First of all, I was born joyful. People say, did all your life experiences kind of cultivate this joy? No. I was just born just a happy person. I love life. I'm totally in love with life. And I really set forward early on in my life to be very healthy. And a few weeks into medical school, I wasn't feeling well. And I ultimately collapsed, was taken to the hospital, had to go to urgent surgery. And the next day, this was in 2000, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, given 3 months to live without treatment, 20 months to live with treatment. It was very difficult. They said I needed to drop out of medical school. They said I would never be able to have children, but I just stayed the course. I really upheld a healthy lifestyle that gave me autonomy over my disease. David, I remember looking out when I had my bone marrow transplant and seeing everyone else essentially dying in an effort to stay alive. But I described that I really attained my vitality without pause. And there were so many different elements that contributed to that. But it was just such a gift to be able to experience and face my mortality at such a young age, and to be able to kind of flip that script on cancer and really transition it to more of a teacher of life. And I am grateful for that experience at such a young age. It's made me a better physician, a better person, and a better communicator. Unfortunately, those treatments really affected my heart. The tumor was wrapped around my heart,
Mm.
compressing all the major vessels. I was in cardiogenic shock. So when I received radiation, it had to go right to my heart. I never want other people to think, oh, this is why I'm not going to do chemo. This is why I'm not going to do radiation. We knew that this was likely going to be collateral damage, but they cured the cancer, right? So shortly after my cancer diagnosis, I was diagnosed with advanced heart failure with an ejection fraction, how much my heart beat is of 8%. And this was in 2003. And so I lived with heart failure for 18 years. I had a near-death experience in 2016 with a flat line for 4 minutes,
Oh,
came back to life. That, right there, gosh, I mean, in the near-death experience, I describe it as total acceptance of the complete unknowing. I mean, if there's any bigger lesson in life, it's that. And, if people question divinity or a creator, God, whatever your term for that is, something bigger than ourselves, I was embraced in the hands of God. It was just a sense of
yeah,
all-encompassing
totally.
love,
Totally.
unity, harmony, and stillness. And that moment of my near-death experience was what was embodied when I met the Dalai Lama. It was exactly that same unified love that I experienced. So after that near-death experience in 2016, things were really challenging. It was constantly downhill. The last surgery I had was in 2019. I actually had a stroke with that surgery, lost vision in my left eye. And then that led to me being listed for heart transplant in 2019. So heart failure is just so hard for a young person. You're kind of shackled with it. And I'm a high energy, if you can't
Yeah,
tell,
I
person.
know.
So no one would have known. I probably functioned with like normal energy, but oh my gosh, had my heart transplant in 2021, February 5th. And I describe my life now as just effortless. It's like so easy. It's just like
I love it.
fabulous.
Well, the perspective after that, I think things are probably, even more perspective. Obviously, you had a lot of joy as you were talking about. Now, in this near-death experience, I think these are really interesting. A good friend of mine did this movie called After Death, and it was all based on people who literally could feel themselves outside of their body, looking down on their body, and with the connection to God. It's about basically like heaven exists. They're feeling that of going there, but then come back in, but they get that taste. Now, in your near-death experience, did you get that taste? Were you looking down on your body, or were you still, how was that?
I never had that looking down on my body. I actually had a second near-death experience around
Oh
my
my
heart
God.
transplant. There were multiple complications after the original transplant. And they had to take me back to the operating room. And this is one I don't really share because that one was very turbulent. And I don't know. I have a thought behind that. It's kind of probably a long discussion. But at that point, I had a new heart in my body. And I just
Yeah.
wonder, again, during my near-death experience, I described total acceptance of the complete unknowing. I was raised with faith in my life and deep belief in
Yeah.
God and this,
Yep. Same.
concept of heaven. And after my heart transplant, all of a sudden I have a new heart, a new perhaps perspective that was joining my own unique, understanding of what that means when you may be crossing over to the other side, if you may be. So that was a very turbulent experience where I remember seeing outside my body. I felt like my body was twisting and turning, and it was just awful. It was very confusing and disoriented. And I remember kind of just wrestling with what was going on. So I understand what people mean by seeing outside their body based on that second experience I had following my heart transplant. But for me, the 4-minute near-death experience, that was just this harmony of this other transitional plane of existence, wasn't one that I was seeing down below. I remember my body feeling like it was floating and as if I was
Yeah.
just being handled by
Wow.
the hands of God. There's a doctor, Dr. Grayson, who had interviewed me, and he takes accounts of near-death experiences and writes on them. And he said the one thing that is the common finding is that unified love of just being held, just like you had said, David.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. Okay. Shifting gears a little bit here as you're, Mayo Clinic doctor. That's like, the highest of high of there is. Now, have you seen I feel like there's kind of been like, everything's a pendulum swinging one way, swinging the other way of big hospitals getting a bad rap in terms of they're not treating their patients in a outside, maybe call it holistic kind of a way. Have you found that kind of friction anywhere? My brother's a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic, so I know, you know, big versus non-big. It seems like it's a lot of times they're either one way or the complete other way. Have you felt this kind of pull in the last, 2 to 3 years?
Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, MD Anderson, Memorial Sloan Kettering, these large medical centers know the importance of prevention and a holistic approach to care. This has been at the foundation of Mayo Clinic since its inception. These large academic medical centers are known for treating and curing rare diseases. So that's kind of what's always in the headlines. But at the root of that, the reason we're so good at doing what we do is because we pay attention to the needs of the patient. My specialty at Mayo Clinic and the cancer center is integrative oncology and lifestyle medicine, where I'm given 90 minutes with my patient. I only now focus on how my patients live at the time of a cancer diagnosis to help them live a healthy nutritional pattern, leaning more towards that whole food, plant-based nutrition, making sure they're exercising. There's some cancer centers still that tell runners when they get cancer, hey, you're going to need to hang up your running shoes until you're done with treatment. No, we're out there running 5Ks and half marathons
Wow.
with our patients if they desire to do that. And then another part of that is just that really holistic scope of practice with just their acceptance of their diagnosis and their mindset. Mindset is so important, so I would say that, yes, I think there's been an uptick of this, because social media, the patients are advocating for it themselves. So many hospital systems that weren't adopting this, like Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, et cetera, the hospitals kind of are getting forced into it. But we've been in this space for a very long time. This is nothing new for us. And it's a very exciting opportunity to be at the forefront of that. And Mayo Clinic is there's some extremely exciting things that we're doing in this space, everything from AI, regenerative farming, to cooking demonstrations. We bring in plant-based chefs to help us cook.
Wow.
So I can go on and on with some of the different programming we offer for patients as well as staff. We want our staff to be healthy because we know that they're going to role model this behavior. After I fly back to the US, I'm going to Arizona to give a talk. And that's the second line on my title slide is, it starts with you. So when I talk to physicians about healthy living for patients, I say, hey, I need you to apply all these concepts to you first and role model it so you can be enthusiastic about feeling good about your health.
So do you think it's just a case by case basis? I think kind of what I'm putting at is like, I think societal people are on one camp or the other. They're either like, hey, we love big hospitals, or no, I'm never going into a big hospital again because, they're more about making money than they are treating the patient. So I think, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure you've probably heard both sides. Like, how do we bring this together? And what do you like? Do, do you think I mean, obviously there's a best of both worlds.
You're right, David. And I think it's important for academic medical centers to stick behind the science and to make sure individuals with specialties like mine are public, that we're active, not just with our patient care, but that we're informing the public. And so I stay very active, joining, folks like you who are able to move this message forward to the community. And I really, really want to give a shout out to all healthcare providers in this space of health and well-being to move forward that message and enrich it with science, because there is a lot of opinion out there and it gets very conflicted and confusing. And if someone gets cancer, that's not the time to all of a sudden just lean in on eating healthy. You want to do a combination of both, that integrative approach to care. And,
Yeah.
I feel that's why I'm alive today and flourishing and doing great, is because my ailments are able to be cured by conventional care, but I partnered it with these healthy approaches to living.
Well, I think you said a word there too, opinions, which is an interesting one. There's so much opinion out there. There's so much, everybody's trying to move the needle in their own social media, this and this and this. Let's look at truth. All right. So, like, what metrics in terms of we want to have a healthy heart? And if someone's looking at numbers of blood biomarkers of a healthy heart? Because there's a whole camp of like, oh, cholesterol is a terrible thing for you. And then they're like, no, cholesterol is a good thing for you. Like, can we
So
just,
confusing.
figure out like what metrics we should actually look at to know if our heart's healthy? Because
Yeah.
it's getting confusing.
David, you're exactly right. And quite frankly, I think it's confusing amongst the medical providers in and of themselves. I even see it with my own healthcare providers at Mayo Clinic. I myself, of course, I work in the cancer section of Mayo Clinic, but I check Apo Bs on my patients. And there's a lot of colleagues that I work with that don't necessarily check Apo B. When it comes to LDL, I think that for me personally, I think that's a rather generic number. I also worry about a lot of people having elevated LDLs. They get a CT calcium score, their calcium score is 0, and they're like, I'm fine. Well, guess what? You're fine right now. You don't know what that's going to be. And you also don't know what the endothelial health looks like, So for me, I really appreciate that Apo B because it kind of characterizes that LDL and the more atherogenic potential of developing plaque in those arteries. So you're exactly right. There's still not a consensus, I feel, among the professionals, and science is moving forward in that space. At the end of the day, we all know what it means to eat a healthy diet. We all know what heart health looks like, and that's not a carnivore diet. I think we should all have agreement with that. So I think anytime someone's extreme, balance, extreme is never good. And I don't think people have to be vegan necessarily. Although whole food plant only nutrition works really wonderful for me personally, I don't push that on my patients. I just want them to eat healthier. And let's just start with trying to get rid of ultra processed foods.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, so would you say that like correct my ignorance here in terms of not being a medical doctor. So the Apo B, is that that's one that you want to check? Do you want that? Like what number range do you want that at? And I also say this in a like personal selfish way of I'm getting my blood taken tomorrow. I want to know where, like when I go and check that, like if I'm on the right point. So am I checking LDL, HDL, Apo B? Like what are the main things to know? All right, David, your heart's doing well. Like you're on a good track.
That's a great question, David. So I believe really truly in getting a general lipid panel, seeing where that LDL falls, looking at where the HDL is. But the HDL probably really truly isn't going to be protective enough to get you out of trouble of a high LDL or a high Apo B. At Mayo Clinic, our Apo B cutoff for it starting to get red flagged is anything greater than 90. If someone has risk factors for heart disease, it's probably a good idea to push that Apo B less than 70 even. Quite frankly, very few of my patients are less than 70 until they really transition to that whole food plant, more predominant nutritional pattern is what I do see. And everyone is unique, and individual family history plays into this. There's other molecules that play into this that have to do with gut microbiome, something called TMAO that can kind of drive forward a little more of this atherogenic potential as well. But at the end of the day, the responsiveness, whether your numbers are perfect or not, is you've got to eat a healthier diet, getting rid of that ultra processed food, getting more vegetables and fruits, getting more fiber, and eat like your grandmother did. It's pretty basic. It's not that difficult. Truly, move your body. You got to exercise,
Oh man, I hope my grandma ate well. I know I always used to have chocolate Dove bars in her freezer, so maybe I'll go back to that.
They had moderation. They didn't overeat.
Yeah, no, I'm just messing. No, yeah, no, that's really good. That's really good to know. I love those hard numbers and know to look at so people can have an understanding. Everything definitely comes back to the fundamentals and like you've been coming back to, and I totally agree. Let's go to the oncology area and cancer. And is there anything, because I feel like that's one of those ones that it's still, and maybe, once again, correct me, but it feels like it just comes. Like you don't really have, like, hey, I could potentially get cancer. It just kind of, boom, you got cancer. Like, is there any things that we can check and track of like, I'm more at risk for cancer, or like, what do you see in that sense?
David, that's a wonderful question. And the hard thing with cancer is, the American Cancer Society, the estimates are that 40% of all cancers could be prevented.
Yeah, it's amazing.
There's estimated over 2 million cancer cases happening this year. Over 2 million. 1 in 2 Americans are going to get cancer in their lifetime. These numbers are very startling. If we look at breast cancer, everyone kind of thinks, oh, I don't have a family history, I'm not going to get breast cancer. But the truth is only about 5 to 10% of breast cancers are from family history. Another 5 to
Wow.
10% are from genetics. So about 20 to
Wow.
25% are from those reasons. So 75% are happening because of other influences.
Yeah.
And we need to be very, very mindful of this aspect. Now we are able to consider testing people with early cancer detection testing. So that just depends on the person, their comfort level with that. But if we find cancer early, it's much easier to treat. What I struggle with are women that don't want to do mammograms when they turn 40. If a woman does have a family history of early age breast cancer in their family, they may need to start those mammograms as early as 35, maybe even 30 years old in some situations. And so early detection is very important. But that's not primary prevention. Primary prevention is living a healthy lifestyle. It's
Yeah.
critical. Let's just try
Yeah.
to avoid it from happening in the beginning.
Well,
But I
that's good
really
to
think in
know.
the
Yeah.
next, yeah. But in the
Keep
next
going.
5 years, I
In the
think it's
next,
going to come down to this early cancer detection testing. And
yeah.
people that are comfortable with it will be able to be a part of this. And there's more and more consumer-based testing that you can have these sorts of things checked.
I mean, I think that's really encouraging for people to know that it's epigenetics where it can be changed based on your lifestyle that you're living. Has there been any like in everything that you've seen, has there been any trends that you can see of like, hey, someone has a high this number or a low this number, and they're more prevalent for a type of cancer? Or is it just, hit and miss?
And again, great question. I always like to look at the lifestyle. And I would say that if we just look at the basics of eating healthier, something a easy take home would be eating more vegetables and fruits. If someone gets 5 or more servings of vegetables and fruits a day, which that seems easy, but only 1 in 10 Americans hit that mark. But in individuals that get 5 or more versus 2 or less, they have 10% reduced mortality from dying from any cancer at all. And that's really, really important when we look at something just so incredibly basic. When we look at the ultra processed foods, we see individuals that consume a higher quantity of ultra processed foods have an increased risk of dying from cancer. I don't really like using those numbers
Sure.
necessarily when I'm talking to a patient, but that's what the reality shows us. There was an interesting study in the UK that showed that this increase in ultra processed foods drove breast cancer mortality by 16% and ovarian cancer mortality by 30%. Those are really startling numbers. Another study showed that mono and diglycerides, this is like ubiquitous. This is in wraps. People embarking upon a healthy lifestyle often will do wrap sandwiches. Many of the wraps that we have mono and diglycerides in it, those little wheat sandwiches that you wrap up.
Yeah.
And mono and diglycerides are linked to a 24% increased risk of breast cancer and a 46% increased risk of prostate cancer.
Wow.
Fiber. People aren't getting enough fiber. We see this rapid rise in colon cancer in young people. So it's things as simple as that. We got to move our body. Americans aren't moving their body. We have this overweight, obesity epidemic. We have alcohol consumption happening at a young age. It's a long conversation, but we have to show up for ourselves and live healthier.
Well, it's funny because it's like I tell people, the roadmap is not difficult for a lot of things. Call it success, call it whatever you want, but the execution is the challenge, right? Like people know, got to eat this. It's not difficult, or you got to move your body. It's not difficult, but the execution of doing it on a daily basis becomes something that people just, get in their own way. People are their own worst enemy, even when we know what's going to help us and prevent it and help live a healthy lifestyle, like you've continued to hammer on, which I love. Like that is totally it. I mean, you're on a mission to change lives and mindsets and shift mindsets around this area. And I think a lot of, people are getting smarter, and just health is becoming more, forward facing of not ultra processed foods versus natural foods. Now, let me throw you a curveball on this one, okay? Because this is so I'm from Iowa, and there's an area in Iowa where my mom and her sisters are from, and there's just there's I don't know exactly what it is, if it's runoff, if it's water. The water's been bad up there. There's been something going, like it's in a northwestern area of Iowa, and the breast cancer levels, people dying of cancer, is astronomically off the charts from what I would imagine any other area is. Now, that being said, there's probably some kind of things that you've seen in terms of chemical runoff or chemicals around it or stuff in the water that also causes these things, which then become almost hidden killers, because how do we know that, right?
David, you're exactly right. And, we can't live in fear. That's the truth. And, it's almost like cancer is a baseball game. It's three strikes and you're out. It's not necessarily just one thing that causes kind of an additive accumulation of a lot of insults to the body. The body is so darn resilient. The body wants to heal. The body doesn't want to be sick. But if you're exposed to pollution, we know that, pollution drives breast cancer risk 7 to 8%. If you're exposed to who knows what these runoffs are, there's so much attention on glyphosate, right? We know there's that link with glyphosate, certainly in lymphomas. That was probably potentially my trigger for my own cancer. A lot of people will say, well, wait a minute, you lived a healthy lifestyle. How on earth did you get it? Well, I lived in the country. I played in the water, and it was a runoff from fields. So maybe that's how I got it. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I can't change that narrative now. It's just you accept and you move on. But we can't continue to expose our population to these chemicals within the environment and within our food and with modern day farming practices. And we see, and that kind of, with IMA, even in a perfect diet, we see tons of nutrient gaps with this modern day farming and genetic modification of food. It's just really challenging. But you're correct. There are certain areas of the country where we see this uptick in cancers. And there certainly is investigation in those areas to see the associations of what that causative factor looks like.
Yeah, totally. No, that's well said. That's well said. I mean, it's also, the awareness of where you live in the area, doing as much as you can to prevent it, but also not living in fear. I think that's a key point that you hit on, right? Like you could go hide in a bubble and, get hit by a car tomorrow in that bubble. And then like, what's it all for? So I'm with you on that. What would you say, like, as we wrap up here, like if you could just say, I'm going to give you 3 to 5 tips of these things. If you do these on a daily basis, you're going to put yourself in the best situation to be the healthiest, mitigate risk of cancer, heart failure, any other kind of disease you can think of under the sun. Give me your main tips.
Number one really is this, it's connection, love, harmony with our loved ones, our friends, the community, and do a greater good, do something that really shows up for humanity. That is number one. Have meaning and purpose in life. Number two, I would say, is you got to move your body. You can't sit around, every hour, try to get up, stand, move around, and try to get 30 minutes of exercise every single day. When it comes to nutrition, I don't think we have to be so restrictive about anything, but just make sure you're getting what you need. And I just tell patients, make sure 50% of whatever you're eating, whenever you're eating, is coming from a vegetable or a fruit. That's going to pretty much always ensure you're getting enough fiber. You're going to get the antioxidants and the phytonutrients that you need. And when it comes to body composition, you really have to work at trying to be a normal body weight. That gets harder as we get older because we're losing muscle. So kind of comes back to that moving, but you're going to probably want to do some resistance training along with that movement to try to optimize body composition. And we know that you can't necessarily outrun a poor diet. So the diet is usually driving a lot of that body composition issue as well. And you and I, before we started this, we're talking about sleep, right? The truth is we need sleep. I joke that's when your brain's getting its bath. So, we need to really get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. So, and lastly would be avoiding those toxic substances as much as possible. Of course, don't smoke. When it comes to alcohol, you don't want to overdrink. Alcohol is a carcinogen. For cancer prevention, you want to avoid it. And we know that alcohol doesn't contribute to heart health. So you really want to try to minimize alcohol. If you're a woman, never have more than 1 drink a day, 7 drinks a week. If you're a man, never more than 2 drinks a day. And quite honestly, that is an overestimate of where anyone should be. So we should probably be at a much lower consumption than that. So those would be the various aspects. But again, the foundation of all this, we shouldn't live in fear. We should live in harmony and love. And everything you're doing to be healthy should be just to elevate your own experience with life and your vitality so you can flourish.
Don, that's amazing. Those that last 3 minutes right there, boom, run that back. Play that every morning for people. That was so well said. Don, you're just unreal. Like 4 a.m. from India, you're doing this call with amazing energy. Are you kidding me? Who does that? Who has that? You are just a living testament of health and a living testament of joy. So just honored to have you on here, Don.
Thanks, David. And likewise, right back at you. I believe that everything's mirrored. You see what you are. So thank you for all the amazing work you're doing to just elevate that human experience and joy in others.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Don Mussallem was a survivor of cancer and a heart attack and a lot of other stuff. Okay, so what would you say like the main and trackers, things you actually have to be cognizant about in looking at heart health and potentially like, a heart attack in the future? What are the real ones that we look at? Because it's always like, is it cholesterol? Is it not cholesterol? Is it this? Is it that?
It's a great question and a really important one. And I would say there's Lp(a), which there's a genetic component to that. And you should know your number because it does increase your risk of heart disease substantially.
Nice.
And that's genetic. And that number will be that number. There are ways to move it, which is interesting, but someone should know that number.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of discussion about Apo B being the end all be all.
Right.
And Apo B, again, is important, but I would say Lp(a), Apo B, and then actually looking at the imaging of hard and soft plaque. You've heard about a calcium score, right? Well, nearly everyone's calcium score at 40 is 0. But if you look at their hard and soft plaque, now you're getting a sense of what does their vasculature actually look like.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to look at it, right?
Yeah. So it's not just one number.
Yeah.
And it's a combination of those. If I were to pick the biggest.
The Apo.
Yeah, Apo B, Lp(a), but imaging. Meaningful imaging.
Yeah. I mean, that's very valid. I mean, think about the brain. How many times people actually look at their brain? Hardly ever.
And then the next test that I think is really meaningful, if we're talking about blood work, is something called a Gallery test or a Grail test. And that's an early cancer detection test.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you about that. Okay. What is this one for cancer?
It's, so in research, it was called the Grail.
Okay.
But now it's called the Gallery. It's available for people. And it looks at, I think, around 68 different cancers. And we use it a lot in military operators that have been overseas and deployed. That would be a next very important test. And then full body scans. Again, it's not common here. It's more in the biohacking space. But I do believe that at some point that will become the standard of care.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. You think that's interesting on cancer. And I've had a friend who has had a family member going through cancer and has the means to get them the best care. And it just seems like it's almost a one size fits all thing. And I don't know, I'm not talking out of much education around this, but do you almost think there's like, if you have cancer, you just almost have to have somebody with you to guide you along the way to know, because you can't just chemo everything, and it's just not, because that kills everything.
I don't know. I don't know.
I think there's a lot to be changed in that.
And I think there's a lot of different types of cancers.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's complicated.
Yeah. That's about the best answer you can. It is complicated. I think it feels like, though, almost any of it, and I, once again, could be speaking completely out of my butt, but like can be cured. Ish. Seems like maybe,
I think that we've made a lot of advances. And even from the treatment standpoint, but also what we believe to have been causative. So for example, for the longest time, people believed that testosterone caused prostate cancer.
Jeez.
And for decades, they castrated men because they believed that testosterone caused prostate cancer. And they were wrong.
Jeez.
They were wrong.
They should get refunds on their balls.
They should definitely. I don't think it's going to happen, but for sure. And that becomes, so there's a treatment aspect, but then there's the prevention.
Yeah.
And understanding what things are causative versus what is not.
Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this episode, there's plenty more where it came from. You can go find another episode just like it right here. Come on. You can click it. You know you want to.